find a property you love and jump in, because not doing something is doing something. That's the same thing I say with flying. So I want to encourage people to do it. It's a great business. I believe if you do it right, it is the greatest real estate investment opportunity of our lifetime ever.
Hello, my fellow aviators. Welcome back. I have not done an interview with another pilot and real estate investor on the channel before, so I'm exceptionally excited to have my good buddy Mike of the Pro Pilot Playbook, who I'm sure if you've been around my channel for a while, you probably know about the Pro Pilot Playbook. If you don't, you should definitely check it out. But Mike is also a very active real estate investor and a licensed realtor. And he and I are actually working together to see if we might be able to find me some properties out there in Ohio. So, Mike, you've been at the Airbnb game as a part of your portfolio for a while now, right?
Yeah, I sure have. And thanks for having me on, Trent. There's only two things I love talking about. That's airplanes and real estate. And on my channel, I get to talk all about airplanes. Now I can come on your channel and talk about real estate. It's really great. But yeah. So just the viewers, because they know me from aviation, but as we talk about, like, you had a side hustle video, and I've had some on my channel with Sean. Pilots get into different things because they have a lot of free time, and that's, to me, one of the benefits of becoming a pilot. Sometimes you have so much free time. I mean, it's crazy. I can remember one of my first jet jobs. The plane went down for maintenance for 3.5 months, and I was just off. So it's a
Okay.
yeah. So, we only work, an average corporate pilot might work 10 days a month or so. And those 10 days that you're working, you're only flying an hour or two. So you have all day to use the computer and all that. So the amount of leverage for your time is incredible. So that got me into real estate. And, the flying job wasn't, market wasn't always like it is now. And we love to talk about that. And it's just a wonderful time for you to jump in and everything. But when I started 25 years ago, it was nothing like that. It was very difficult to get a job. 9/11 hit, and I'm like, man, I might need something that I like to do to kind of fall back on. So I went back to college. I already had a 4-year degree in business and aviation. I went back to, it was kind of funny, community college, after I had been at the big university, and I got my real estate license in Ohio. And then I just found out it just worked so well with flying that I continued to do that. I had some assistance when I was traveling, and my wife is also licensed. But along the way, and we may do another video on your real estate license and how you can do that with flying and all that. But today we'll talk about Airbnb. So along the way, I started investing in real estate, and that's one of the reasons I became a real estate salesperson. So I've done and been involved with even more purchasing rental properties. So single family rentals, apartment buildings of all different sizes, duplexes, triplexes, quads, and then all the way up to, I've sold some very big buildings also, not to myself, but to other clients of mine. And then done a lot of flipping, not a lot myself. I've flipped a couple houses, but I've been involved with, in other words, found clients' houses to flip and then resold them, dozens of times. And I see some people win big on that and some people lose. But the thing that opened my eyes to real estate investing was when I was an agent. This is back in, right after, 9/11 and all that, when I was spooling up. These people would buy these homes, just any house, and then something would happen in their life. They'd use me to buy it. And then 2 or 3 or 4 years later, they'd call me to sell it. And I'm like, holy cow, now it's worth like 20 or $30,000 more. And they didn't do anything to it.
Mhm.
And oftentimes they would be able to pay me my commissions. And then they would also walk with, 20 or 30 grand that they could use to put down on another house. So that's when I got excited about real estate investing. I'm like, man, I need to buy. I don't even care what they are. I don't care if they cash flow. I just need to buy as many of these little houses as I can and hold on to them, and then just sell them later and make a bunch of money. So that's kind of how it all started. And then to circle back around to the Airbnb, about 6 years ago, I started buying stuff in Florida, and Airbnb was just coming out. And I'm talking to different people in the business, and they're like, "Man, you really should, you should look at this. These these properties, you're able to cash flow them a lot more. And I'm like, I don't know, there's an off season and an on season, and then I don't want to run a hotel and all this kind of stuff. Well, then I had a great realtor friend in St. Augustine, Florida, sharing some numbers with me, and I'm like, this is staggering. So I kind of stumbled into it by I was doing some developing at the time in downtown Cincinnati, and what we were doing is buying condos and doing conversions. So we'd take a big apartment building. I'm sorry, buying apartments and doing conversions. So the downtown was going through a revitalization, and basically you're seeing this in a lot of cities. The urban core was becoming increasingly popular, so we would approach people with apartment buildings, and then we would say, hey, look, we'll do the legal work, and say the building's worth $1 million and it's a 6 unit or something. We'll do the legal work, turn it all into condos, then we'll list each individual unit, and instead of making a million, you might make 1.6, because each unit might sell for 300,000. So it was an easy sell. Well, simultaneously, I'm talking to this realtor in Florida that's making all this money on Airbnb. I'm like, you know what? I have the opportunity to buy some of these units because I'm a developer at a reduced price. So I'm going to just buy one and see what happens. So this was 6 years ago when hardly anyone was doing Airbnb. And then I realized quickly the money was really good. And then I realized an even more important thing than the money. And what you'll commonly see is you can sometimes make 2 or 3 times the rent you can make off a long-term rental Airbnb. But I realized the lifestyle, and this is something I spoke with you about, Trent, off camera, that you should consider as you do your journey into to Airbnb and real estate investing. Is I always had all these properties, and I had long-term tenants in it, and I own a dozen of them or so. And I'd only visit them once every 2 years or whatever. Or I'd make them nice, and then somebody would move in and they're gone. Well, then I got this property downtown, and then I started realizing I live way the hell north of Cincinnati in the bedroom community of Westchester, which, if traffic's bad, could be even an hour from downtown. It's really about 35 minutes with no traffic. Well, then there's all this cool stuff going downtown. And then I realized I got a place down there. So, you're meeting some buddies down there to go to a Reds game, or your favorite singer is playing down there. And then I'm like, oh, I'll just block the unit off. And then I don't even have to worry about the drive. And then I had people pre-gaming. They'd meet me at my place, and they're telling me how cool it is. And this is awesome. And it's like always ready to go. It's closer to the private airport that I fly out of. So sometimes if the weather was going to be bad or we had an early departure, I would just stay there. So I just realized quickly that there's a lot of other benefits to these things than there are long-term rentals. So utilization and all that. So that led me into buying more downtown, and then it led me into buying in Florida. And we'll get into more of
Yeah,
that
let
later.
me
But
interrupt you there. So,
yeah, yeah,
what we've concluded so far is that you've seen two very real benefits of Airbnb over a traditional rental. Number one, higher cash flow. Number two, you actually get to use it yourself. So
yes,
now people might be thinking, okay, maybe, but let's unpack the
okay,
process of getting into this business. So we're going to
sure,
talk over the next while, guys, about market and strategy. We're going to talk about regulations and compliance, managing these things, the financial risks, how to overcome those risks, and then we'll button it up with some advice for the new folks. So, with that in mind, my next question for you is, before you can buy an Airbnb, you got to pick a location. So, assuming obviously, if you like to vacation in San Diego, well, maybe you might want to start in San Diego. But if someone didn't have that in mind, how do you go through evaluating is a particular market, and just you can talk about your own
yeah.
personal experience. Is this a good market for an Airbnb versus this other market over here, this market over there, what have you?
Great question, Trent. So I'll try to not be so long-winded so we can get to everything. So a lot of people say, "Well, I Airbnb my house and it didn't do any good," or I had a multi-unit building and one of the units went vacant. I tried Airbnb, it didn't get. Well, maybe you Airbnb the property because you had this opportunity with the property. You didn't hand select the property, so that's completely different. So if we have viewers watching that want to hand select something, there's a couple things you look at. Obviously, you need your property in a desirable place where people want to go for whatever reason, be it pleasure or business, or more importantly, business and pleasure is fantastic. So if you're an obvious example would be if you're in a vacation rental area like Florida or California, like we brought up, or Arizona. But in your own town, you may not want to, take that big step. You need to look at what is bringing people in and where those things are located. Now, the simple answer is usually downtown, and that's where my first investments were in Cincinnati. You have look at what's drawing the people. Most people, when they go to a city, and pilots too, if we land somewhere, it's like when I first worked at a company that booked our own hotels, and it was a big fractional ownership company. They would always just book the hotel right by the airport, and nobody likes that, man. There's nothing to do out there. You got to get in the car for everything you do. You got to deal with parking. You don't know where you're at driving and everything. Most people want to stay downtown and they want walkability, right? So they want to be able to stay in an area where there's restaurants they can walk to, bars, things to do. They don't have to screw with parking, all the actions down there. That's where you want to stay. And you'll see even these suburban hotels, they're putting these hotels in these shopping centers, and because those are popular, it's almost like a mini downtown. So think about that when you're bringing in, and what are the draws to your city. So in Cincinnati, we have the Reds, the Bengals, FC Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Convention Center, and then 4 or 5 really hot music venues. So people are going to come in. That's going to draw people in. All those things that I mentioned, and then those people want to spend the night. One, maybe because they're drinking. Two, maybe just they live, 2 hours from the city and they're driving in to see their artist, and the concert's going to be over at 11 and they don't want to drive back. So all of those things bring in people. So that's a very good first start. Then secondly, without getting too long-winded, is I always encourage people, if there's something you like, an area that you like, and this is the first thing I said to you, Trent, you and your wife, you say that you love going to Colorado. You try to go every summer, or you try to go every winter and ski. If you invest in an area that you like, a lot of things don't matter as much. It's not just a numbers game, it's an emotional thing. If like a lot of guys come to me, and this is what I did, and they say, well, I go, why are you buying all these apartment buildings? Well, I want to buy a bunch of apartment buildings, pay them off. And then what? Then you go, and then what? Well, then I'm going to sell them, and then I'm going to use the money to buy a house on the beach. Okay, well, how about this? What if you just buy the beach house now? That thing functions the same manner and you get to use it. Then as soon as I heard that and came to that epiphany, I'm like, oh, you mean I can do that and get the
Mhm.
tax breaks, which we'll get into later. So bottom line is, look for travel areas in your city, or if there's a place with you're in love with, and you're willing to maybe not make as much money because it's going to get you where you want to be, then just heavily research that market.
Okay. So, can you share your strategy for how you price your properties and how you maximize your occupancy rates? Because
Yeah.
obviously those are pretty.
Yeah. So this is really a fun
relevant.
topic, Trent. Gosh, you got all the good questions already out the gate, man. We're gonna give people a lot of information. So everybody goes, okay, so they go, oh, all my buddies, because they live in Cincinnati and they want to go downtown and see a show or whatever, they go, hey, how much you charge per night for your Airbnb downtown? I'm thinking about renting it. Or how much is your house in Florida? I'm thinking about taking the kids down there. Well, there's no answer to that question, because every single night the rate is different. It's just like a hotel, okay? So or an airline ticket, right? And it's very similar to that. There are some differences that we'll touch on, but what we use is what's called dynamic pricing, and everybody does all this. So if you want to rent on a Tuesday night in downtown Cincinnati in February, when you can't even walk outside and there's no conventions or anything going on, you might be able to get a beautiful 2-bedroom Airbnb for $100 plus cleaning fee. Now, my record breaking Cincinnati was when Taylor Swift came to town, and we have several events. There's actually about 9 events in Cincinnati annually, and this is very fun part of being an investor. You can real estate, you can Airbnb, you can really research this and really get into this. So there's about 9 events that the entire town is a complete sellout. Like with Taylor Swift, you could barely get a hotel in Louisville, which is 2 hours away, for people coming to Cincinnati. So
Wow.
And there's analysis of all this. It's all available. So you know how many hotel rooms are downtown, and then you have how many people are coming from out of town to see something. FCC Cincinnati does some soccer things that bring in a huge crowd from overseas. That'll sell out everything. In those cases, um, you can really charge a lot. So I mean, I've gotten $999 a night for a 2 bedroom unit with 1 bath, 1,000 square feet downtown during Taylor Swift for multiple nights because there's nowhere to stay. And you're not. Some people may listen to this and they say, "Oh, you're taking advantage of people." You're really not, because the hotels do all this too.
Hmm.
And everything costs that much. So you might as well, you're not running a charity, right?
I'm
And
pretty sure it's called capitalism.
it's called capitalism, right? So here's an interesting thing, though, Trent, that you can do, a technique. I'll just share one tip here. So airlines, if you notice, they'll have all these seats. They're selling a flight to LA. They have all these seats. It's in 2 months. As the seats sell out, the price goes up, right? And it's just pretty simple. They got to sell all these seats. So when scarcity becomes an issue, the price goes up. Hotels are the same way. So even for the Taylor Swift event, they'll jack the rate up, but as the rooms sell off, the rate gets even higher because there's less left. They have to sell 400 rooms. I only have to sell one. So what you can do, as soon as you hear there's a big event, Monday Night Football, I just did this, you'll block the unit off like it's booked, wait for the entire town to sell out, and then about a week before, when there's nothing available, you list your unit, and then people go crazy for it.
Mhm.
So that's a pricing thing. There's Florida's the same way. If you're in South Florida and it's December 26th, every single person in the world that has money, I don't know, that's a very big generalization though, likes to spend Christmas at their cold, awful place that they live up north with a fire in the fireplace, and all the kids come over. And then the very next day, they get the hell out and go somewhere warm. So on those dates, if you have properties in South Florida, the Caribbean, Southern California, on December 26th through January 3rd, because everyone's off, all the kids are off school, nobody bothers you. Even if you're in business, it's like nothing's going on. Those are the Super Bowl, man. You can charge almost anything those days. So these are extreme examples. You got Taylor Swift, and then you have Christmas time in Florida. But that's how you maximize your profit. So what we look at, and this may touch on another question, is when you evaluate an Airbnb property, you never say how much does it rent per night or how much does it rent per month, which you would on a annual rental. You look at the annual cash flow. That's how everyone evaluates Airbnbs, because almost every market, with the exception of maybe Orlando, has what's called seasonality. Okay, so
Mhm.
you have in Cincinnati, you make all your money in the summer because the weather's good and all the sports teams are in town and all that stuff. In the winter, there's some things going on. The weekends rent and everything. In the summer, the rates are double. Everybody's here. In Florida, South Florida, you make all your money in the winter because it's 85 degrees and there's a beautiful beach. So you make all your money in the winter. Now, Northern Florida is different. Northern Florida is actually a driving destination, and it's big in the summer for families. They drive down. So it just depends on where you're at. Now, some areas are really good seasonality. Orlando, Florida, because there's an amusement park there. A lot of people have heard about it. That stays very stable year round. Colorado is has a great score on seasonality because obviously they're skiing there, but then in the summer, it's also
Yeah.
beautiful. So another thing to look at. So when we take a snapshot or we're evaluating a property, we look at the annual revenue.
And there are tools to help you do that. AirDNA
Yep.
is, I think, the main one that people use. You basically can punch in an address, and the algorithm is going to give you its best guess on what that property would generate on an annual basis. Do I have that right?
That's the gold standard, AirDNA. So for people watching and they're ready to make the next step and start analyzing their investment, obviously the free way to do it is just get on Airbnb on your town and kind of look at the calendars of everything and see what's booked and see what rates they're getting. The problem is when it's booked, it doesn't show the rate. It only shows the
Right.
rate when it's vacant. AirDNA software will analyze VRBO and Airbnb, and it'll show all the listings in your area, and then it gives you that golden number that I'm talking about, which is the annual rent number. It predicts that. Now, it's similar to a Z estimate on Zillow. It's not perfect, right?
Mhm.
You could gold plate the ceilings in your house, and it's worth more than your neighbors, but Zillow doesn't know that. Same way with AirDNA, but it is an excellent baseline. You used to have to pay per zip code, but I think now that things are softening a bit, I think it's 40 or $50 a month. And you can analyze the whole U.S. So I mean, you could spend hours. It's looking at what people are making and where you might want to make your move.
So, how do you decide on the type of property that you're going to purchase? The size, the location, what amenities you're going to put in it? Because you're really, I was talking when I was out looking at a property last night with
Yep.
a realtor, and they have a large portfolio of rentals. He said, Trent, 5 or 6 years ago, it was easy. You could just make your house available for rent. But now he says, you're really in the hospitality business.
Yes.
And you better have some perks and you better have some kind of extra stuff. So,
Yeah.
can you speak to that?
Yeah, another great question, Trent. So, okay, so couple things. I can speak about the two markets that I know best, Florida and urban Cincinnati core. Um, let's start with Cincinnati. Um, we used to have a hotel shortage. Now they built a bunch of brand new hotels as the city revitalized and all that stuff. So your number one competitor is the hotel market. So the quick answer to that in Cincinnati is you need multiple bedroom units. If
Mhm.
you have a one bedroom unit, you're competing with all the hotels. If you have a two or a three bedroom, they can't compete, and those are the ones that really make the money. You have two couples, you and your wife are traveling with another couple to see an event. You each have your own room, but you can still stay together. A hotel can't offer that, and that's extremely important. In Florida, the first and foremost from Florida, well, there's two things that are crucially important. Number one, your proximity to the beach. Everybody, yeah, this is a good one in South Florida that I get. They go, "Oh, y'all, you got a house in Florida? Where's it at?" And then I go, "Naples," and they go, "Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, is it on the beach?" And then you go, "No, no, you can ride your bike there, but you're on the." And then they kind of get this sigh, and then they're like, "Oh yeah," and then they'll even add sometimes they go, if I was going to buy a house down there, I'd buy it right on the beach. Well, you don't have a clue, buddy, because if you're a mile from the beach, the house is $1 million. If you're on the beach, it's like 45 million. So there's nobody Airbnb and anything on the beach in Naples. Nobody, unless you're spending 30,000 a night. And I don't even really know about it. So it's a yin and a yang, but your proximity to the beach, particularly the parking, is a problem everywhere. Even in California, parking at the beach is a problem. So if the customer can either access by walking or by bike, that's a huge deal. But even more importantly, almost than that in Florida, is that your house has a pool. Because people with families, they want to swim, they want to be outside. You could have the same. You could pay $1 million for one house that's super sweet without a pool, and then have a smaller, crappier house that has a pool for 500,000, and it would double your rent on Airbnb because people want the pool.
Mm.
So that's very important. Now you touched on another really cool thing is these extras. So in it's a known thing. Airbnb is softening worldwide as the economy, especially in the United States, starts to soften with inflation and all that travels down a little bit. Um, One of the ways to compete and to set your Airbnb apart is have a theme to it. So really big in the Orlando market is these theme rooms. We're doing it some in Naples too, where you'll have, one room will be like Snow White and the other one will be like a transformer room for the kids. We do see game rooms; those are real popular. You'll finish off a room with air hockey and video games and things like that that would appeal to your market. And then you can appeal to the beach crowd. This is the fun thing about Airbnb. There's so many things you can do, and a lot of them don't cost a lot of money. You have add new bikes or maybe electric bikes or sweet beach equipment and focus that all in. I added a commercial ice maker in my house, so the boaters love it if they're bringing their boat in, or they can fill their coolers and go to the beach and all that stuff. So there's a lot of little things you can do. I added a hot tub to my house. It's a pain in the ass because you got to drain it every time, but it differentiates my listing from a lot of other ones because most landlords don't want to deal with that. And when there's a lot of supply and lower demand, people will go for the hot tub because they want it. So a lot of interesting things you can do, and it's really a lot of fun. You know?
And I think probably the best way to learn about what those things are is just browse listings and see what other people are
Yes,
doing.
yeah,
All right, we're going to talk now and dive into the thrilling topic of regulations and compliance. As exciting as it may or may not
yes.
be, it is important to understand this stuff. So, what should investors be aware of in terms of local regulations and zoning laws for short term rentals? Because if you're not informed, that can be quite a problem.
Yes, and probably this is, although it's boring, like you said, this is the most important question in this whole interview that you could ask, because this is an issue. This is a huge issue, and I've gone through this. I've been involved in Airbnb for 6 years, so I've seen it in its infancy, where regulation couldn't keep up, to where it was heavy regulation, and now we're kind of on a little on the back end of that. Here's the thing: if you are buying an Airbnb anywhere, the very first thing you need to do is research the regulations. And the reason why is it could change. And remember that no regulation, and this was taught to me very early on, no regulation does not mean you're fine. If you go to a market and there's tons of Airbnbs and there's no Airbnb laws, that doesn't mean you're fine. It means you're good for a while, but they
Mhm.
could pass something that outlaws it. And here's the bottom line: nobody likes living next to Airbnbs. They don't. Long-term tenants and short-term tenants, which are Airbnb people, don't really mesh well. Okay. Or at least there's that perception. A lot of people, like my neighbors, once they live next to one, they're like, well, you really take a lot better care than the other places. And then some of them end up using my house when their family's in town and they really like it. But the overall perception in a neighborhood is that it's bad, right? If you're in a condo building, like some of my stuff in Cincinnati, they don't want a hotel room next to it and everything. I always think of a time when I was in Florida, and we're always traveling on our flying job, and we're not partying, and we're not on vacation, and we're eating at a restaurant, and there's a group of people that are just like super loud, and they're having a great time at the table next to you. And I remember this guy's like, "Let's do some shots." And then so he orders a round of shots for the whole table, and we're just watching. We're not drinking or anything. We got to fly in the morning. And then the guy holds up, the shots come, and he's like, "Let's do a toast." And they can't think of what to say. They're so drunk. And then he goes, "We're in Florida," and then they all toast, right? So that could be your neighbor if you live next to an Airbnb, so it doesn't mesh well. So there is a push. So a lot of the residents, and I understand that, they put pressure on the city then to regulate Airbnb restrictions. Some of the restrictions you see are uh, a very common one in California that basically shuts Airbnb down, as they say you have to live in the property to rent it. Now, when Airbnb was first conceptualized, it was like you could rent a room in your house, and then it quickly morphed into whole properties, and that's mostly what's on there. So most investors are not just renting a room for extra money; they're buying entire properties. So that's a quick way, because they're like, well, there won't be any parties if the owner lives in the property. Then that's probably the heaviest. We did get another thing to touch on is this: not just the neighbors, but it's very damaging to the hotel business. I'm sure, and here's an example. I'm sure that you've seen videos or news stories about Airbnb parties, and so there was a party with 50 people there, and all this kind of stuff, and everything. They're all over the news, right? Whenever something bad happens at Airbnb, God forbid somebody gets shot or something, sometimes it even makes the national news. How many times, Trent? Let me ask you: have you seen a news story where there was a party at a Hilton or a Marriott? No,
You
no,
don't see it
doesn't make
because
news, right? Well,
they're shutting that stuff down.
yes, yes. I won't share specifics, but I know a police officer in Florida, and he shared a story with me. A very nice hotel where it was on the ocean in a very nice part of Florida. You would know the name of the hotel right away if I said it. It's $500-600 night hotel. He responds to a party there, and it's so big. Somebody actually took a pig and they put it in the bathtub and put charcoal on top of the bathtub, and they were roasting a pig in the bathtub of this hotel, and they had the patio doors open so the smoke could come out.
Wow.
So it does happen, right? But it's not newsworthy because it doesn't push an agenda. So
Yeah.
the Airbnb business is very detrimental to the hotel business. A lot of Airbnb owners, in my opinion, are like me. They're not big companies; they're small guys. So you get a lot of friction from the hotel lobbyists to shut it down. So that's another issue. Yeah. So, these things do happen in hotels. There are parties, and they just don't make the news because it's not pushing an agenda. And this is just speculation on my part. But, Airbnb really hurts the hotel market. It really does. And they make pushes in certain markets to make Airbnb look bad, to push the regulation so they make more money, because oftentimes it's not big companies running Airbnbs; it's little guys like us that are running it. One of the tactics, and this was rumored in Cincinnati when they regulated that they were going to do, is impose commercial building code on Airbnb. Well, that would be very difficult because, like as you know, in the house that most of you are sitting in, that there's not sprinkler systems. Well, hotels are required to have sprinkler systems, so that would effectively have cut out 90% of the Airbnbs in Cincinnati. But a group of us got together and we talked to city council about the benefits, and that really the customer, the tourism people want this. So they were able to move that out and everything went fine. So they started taxing Airbnbs, which, if you're researching a market and Airbnbs are paying hotel and occupancy tax, you want to welcome that. The reason why is that legitimizes it. And the
Yeah.
city then gets used to that income, and it makes it much harder for them to later ban it. So keep all those things in mind when you're looking forward on
Okay.
the market. Yeah.
Let's talk about, we're going to dive deeper into, how to mitigate risks a little later on
Yes.
here. So let's talk about management and operations. So you have properties in multiple locations. How do you go about managing those? Are you relying on a property manager, or are you doing that yourself?
Okay, great question. So you can tell I like this. I'm really into this stuff. I think it's fun. I buy properties that I love. I love to take care of them. I love to interact with the guests, and when they ask, "Oh, where should we eat at?" and stuff, I love that. My wife tells me that when I retire, I'm going to run one of those tour buses. Where you tell, "Oh, and over here is this," because I like to tell people about stuff. So for me, I self manage. I understand real estate. I understand the game. I care about my properties, and I feel like nobody could do it better than I am. And as you know, Trent, short-term rentals, which are Airbnbs, and long-term rentals have much different management fees, right?
Mhm.
A long-term property manager, conventional rental might charge 5 or 10%, where a Airbnb manager might charge 20 or 30%. And some of these houses, like these beach homes or lake houses, they're generating maybe 100,000 in rent. You start getting into six figures, now you're paying 30,000 in management fees. It's a big chunk of money. It's almost all your profit. So if you can have fun with it, engage with the customer, and enjoy doing it, you can really increase your cash flow, and that really helps your bottom line. So I would recommend everything. Airbnb is phenomenal. They've put a ton of money in it. There's a host interface that is great. There's canned automated messages. The customer doesn't even know it's not from you, checking in on them and things. Wonderful, wonderful platform. And you could very easily do that anywhere you're at work, at your other job, anywhere you are in the country, it would be no problem.
All right. So before we, here's what we're going to talk about before we're done. I want to talk about financials and how
Okay.
you pay attention to some of the key metrics and what are the things that you're looking for. And then we're going to talk about the risks that you accept as an Airbnb asset owner as well as a host, and how the various ways you can mitigate those risks with exit strategies and so forth. So let's talk about the financials first. So, what are some of the key financial metrics that you want to track to make sure that your Airbnb is performing up to par?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the research side of things, first you want to research the other Airbnbs before you invest and make sure they're pulling in the annual revenue that's going to support you doing this. That's much higher than long-term rental, because it's not worth all the hassle if it's going to bring in just about the same as a long-term, unless of course you enjoy using it yourself, and that's a different thing. But first, analyze the revenue. Then you want to tweak your occupancy rates by adjusting your rates, and there's a lot of fun things you can do to get that going. So that's the metrics that I track. And then your market seasonality, is important, and you got to think about, okay, you can't spend all your money in the summer if you're not going to make any money in the winter, so you got to budget for all that. And then you have money left at the end of the year. Oftentimes, what I do is use that to make improvements on the property. And you want to strategically do improvements that will increase rent, like I mentioned, the hot tub in Florida, things
Mhm.
like that. And it could be, I happen to want one when I was there, so it worked out great. So, think of cool things that you could do to spend your money to, add new furniture, things like that.
Okay. Now, with respect to the tax side of Airbnb, as a real estate investor, there's all sorts of tax advantages. Can you talk a little bit about just what that looks like when you're an Airbnb owner?
Yes. Now, there's a lot of tax law regarding real estate and everything. One of the things that I can say that you have all the advantages that you would on a long term rental. However, on a short term rental, you can do two things that are different. One is you could actually, in the scenario that I mentioned earlier, where you have the investor that wants to sell his apartment buildings and then cash them out and then buy his retirement house. Well, you could actually sell some of those properties and then utilize what's called a 1031 exchange. And then you can roll them into an Airbnb because it still is an income producing property. And you would talk to a tax professional about this, but this is a way that if somebody's watching here and they want to get in the Airbnb game and they want to sell some of these smelly rentals that they have in bad neighborhoods and then roll that money into a beautiful home in the mountains or on a lake or something, you can do that. And you can do that with a huge tax advantage of a 1031 exchange. You got to be very careful. Now, when you use the house, you have to report those to the IRS, and there's deductions on the nights that you use it, and there's all these regulations associated with it. But it can be done, so that's a tremendous advantage, along with all of the other advantages that you have of owning long-term rentals.
Got it. Okay. Now let's talk about and the I guess the bow on that is talk to your trained certified tax
Yes,
professional because that's really where you want to be getting the nitty gritty details on how this is going
yes,
to.
you don't want to get tax advice from a pilot.
No. But we can talk at least at the high level. So let's talk about risks. We talked before about regulations, and as we know, regulations can change. And hotel groups have lobbyists, and Airbnb probably has a few lobbyists of their own. And there's neighborhood associations, and there's HOAs, and there's all sorts of people
Right.
who have an agenda, which may not be, which may be in conflict with your agenda, and that may force you at some point into no longer being able to be an Airbnb. So, what are some of the things when you are, from my perspective, I'd be thinking about these things before I ever acquired the property. What are some of the exit strategies? So, when I talk about exit, so Airbnb is an exit strategy. It's a way that you make money. Long term rental is an exit strategy, but there are a number of other exit strategies. So, when you're looking at your properties, Mike, how do you think about that? So, just to protect yourself, should Plan A, Airbnb, no longer be available to you?
Great question, and that's important. The first thing I recommend for an amateur investor is on your first property, make sure that the long term rent will cover your expenses in the event of a catastrophic failure of your Airbnb, either by regulation or mismanagement or whatever. That's usually pretty easy in most markets if you just get a modest property. If you go buy a huge multi-million-dollar lake house or beach house, that property may have holding costs of $4,000 or $5,000 a month, and it may only rent for two or 3,000 a month to a long-term tenant because they're not on vacation. That would be a terrible situation if you lost your Airbnb. Now you're coming out of pocket several $1,000s a month. So when you first get your feet wet, make sure your backup strategy can always be long-term rent. And of course, there's always sale, right? You can sell it, but that gets complicated. And we're trying to hold things. Most guys are investing, so you really don't want to sell. And we talked off camera. I know you know about corporate housing in your neck of the woods. I'll let you speak on that because a lot of times when these Airbnb regulations come out, they don't just say you can rent yearly. They usually say a 30-day minimum, which means you can have monthly rentals because
Mm,
a lot of long-term tenants are month to month.
yeah.
So they you can move to a corporate rental, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so there's a number of other exit strategies. You can have midterm rental. So what's a midterm rental? Think of the traveling nurse as an example.
Yeah.
Um, there's corporate housing. So corporate housing is, hey, I work for Google or whatever, and they've transferred me to this new town, and I don't want to just go buy a house yet. So Google is paying for my housing for 6 months or whatever. So they're going to pay a lot higher rate. So, for example, my house here, I was just talking to a guy about this because we're actually thinking of doing this as a way of making a little extra money, because we started Airbnb this house, and I realized I don't really care if people are in my house. Like,
Yeah.
nobody does any damage. It's great. So you get over this emotional hump of no, nobody can be in my house. So if I was to just empty my house and rent it on a long-term rental, it might bring in 5,000 a month. But if Google wanted to put an employee or an employee's family in it, well, they'd probably be willing to pay closer to 10,000 a month for a furnished house.
There you go.
Another tangent of corporate rental is, somebody has their house burns down. So the insurance company now is the corporate tenant, and they're looking for a place to put that displaced family until their burned down house is fixed. Same thing, they're going to need a furnished house, and the occupant doesn't care what it costs. And for the insurance company, they're going to pay 8-9,000 a month without really batting an eye.
Yep.
So there's what I'm getting at is there's maybe more exit strategies than you might be aware of if you haven't already started to research this. So when you are acquiring your first property, just think about, hey, how many different exit strategies can I get? And the more you can get, obviously, the less risk that you're going to have in that the Airbnb strategy fails for more than likely regulatory reasons, or maybe really bad management.
Yep. I love it. That's great advice, Trent.
So, how do you adapt to fluctuations in demand, especially in the off seasons and/or economic downturns? Do you have a strategy for that?
Yeah, so what you can do is create a bank account just for your Airbnb, and then you have the automatic deposits go right into there, and then you maintain a reserve cash flow. Now, the only time this is really an issue, as long as you've done your research and you know your annual rent is going to cover all your expenses, is if you buy at the wrong time of year and you may have to supplement it initially. For instance, if you bought a house in during hurricane season is when you closed on it in Florida, nobody's going to rent it. You're going to have no money coming in. So you're probably going to have to make the first few payments. But then winter is going to roll around and you're going to make 3 or 4 times your payment those months. And then you accumulate that into your checking account. And then when the hurricane season runs around next year, you just use that money to pay it. So that's about the most simple way to kind of handle that.
So basically, you're saying treat it like a real business and don't just go blow all the money when it comes in at
What Tony Robbins says, don't make sure there's not too much month left at the end of the money.
the end of your money. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's give some advice for new investors before we wrap up. So, for someone considering getting into Airbnb, would you say are the top three things that they should do or think about before purchasing their first property?
Well, here's
And
the
I'll take
thing.
good notes here because this is me.
Oh, this what's that? Oh, yeah. Well, here's
This
the
is
thing.
like
First of
me.
all, the reason I started the Pro Pilot Playbook is I'm a cheerleader. So you got to take this, and I really feel strongly that people should jump into flying. That it's a great thing. I really feel the same way about Airbnb. If you're watching this and you're thinking about doing it, you will love it. Find a property you love and jump in, because not doing something is doing something. That's the same thing I say with flying. So I want to encourage people to do it. It's a great business. I believe if you do it right, it is the greatest real estate investment opportunity of our lifetime ever. If you buy the right properties and it's a learning process and you tweak them and you get everything running just like you want, the opportunities are endless. You get this pride of ownership. I also want to say to the viewers in closing, a lot of the misconceptions that you have, people are going to damage stuff. I have very little damage.
Yeah, me too.
Just standard wear. In fact, I think these properties are taken way better care of than long-term tenants, because long-term tenants are there every single night. They a lot of times have pets. The properties aren't being cleaned regularly. These properties, I mean, my property in Florida, I've had several years. There's been hundreds of people stay there. I can almost walk through it right now, and everything is exactly like I bought it. So number one. The second thing is you're making money. Landlords that are watching that have properties that barely cash flow, which is a lot of long term rentals, the air conditioning goes out. You're like, oh God. And then you got to pay
Yeah.
out of pocket, right? This is not like that. You're making a profit. This is a profitable business. So everything, almost everything, can be solved with money. In the instance when I said that the guest calls at 9 p.m. on a Saturday and it's 97 degrees out and says the air conditioning's broke. Well, I can't get anybody out there till tomorrow, or maybe the next day. I'd like to give you $500 credit. You can go to a hotel right now. You're already making 3,000 on the reservation. Give them $500. It doesn't happen that often. If they want to go to a hotel, they'll love you. If they want to just sweat it out and they, drink a bunch and jump in the pool, and then they get an extra $500, so they're happy. So all this can be solved economically, most of the problems. So the management of it is very easy. So my advice to the viewers are: find a property in an area that you love, that you want to invest in, and make sure you have an exit strategy like we talked about, preferably that it'll long-term rent if it doesn't work out, and jump in.
Solid advice. Taking action is always the how should I put a bow on this? I've never really moved my life ahead and made progress through not doing anything. So
Yes.
yes, take the plunge. And
Love it.
speaking of, so for those of you who followed my channel for a while, you know that I went to Ohio for flight school last summer, and we Airbnb'd our house for 2 months continuously. We made about $30,000, and there was zero damage.
Awesome.
Zero.
Awesome.
And at one point, we had one of our guests was 8 Harley bikers. You think of all the people that would be like destroying your house, it's whatever stereotype you would like. But there was zero damage to the house. So it's been quite a great experience.
Wonderful.
Well, let's wrap with this last question. I've got a number that we didn't get to, but let me go with this one.
Okay.
If you now, with 6 years of experience, if you could go back in time, Mike, and do anything different in your Airbnb business, or you were giving advice to your 6 year
Yep.
ago self, what would that be?
Well, it would always be buy more, because when I look at prices back then and then prices now, but I didn't know at the time. But if I had a time machine, I would say that. And the second biggest thing, the mistake I made, is I wanted to start small, and I bought a one bedroom, which a one bedroom, as we talked about, it competes with hotels, and it's not doing near the cash flow of the larger properties now that I own. So that would be the big thing.
Okay.
Another thing you brought up about the bikers and everything that I want to share with the audience is these people that are typically staying in Airbnbs have a lot of money. They're professional people. They're dropping five, six, $700 on a weekend. In some cases, 10,000 a week. In season for some of this stuff, and they operate. They're not the same as a lower end uh, uh, tenant that you might deal with. They don't have the same problems. And when
Mhm.
there are problems, they operate like, when the air conditioning breaks on a Saturday night, you're talking to a doctor who he is paying a lot of money, but he's reasonable, knowing, it may take a day or two for this to get
Yeah,
fixed. So
yeah.
they're people that are much, they're very great quality of tenants in my experience, compared to long-term rentals.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for
Yep.
making time to be joining us here on one of the first pieces of content we've created for the new real estate audience here on the Fly with Trent channel. It has been a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to having you help me find my first property in Ohio here as soon as we can find one. So thanks
Oh,
very much for watching, everybody. If you have questions for myself or for Mike, please leave those down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please do smash that like button. If this is your first time on the channel and you'd like to get more content about aviation and or real estate investing, please do consider becoming a subscriber here on YouTube. And you can also visit flywithtrent.com if you would like to get an email notification every time we produce a new piece of long form content like this one. Thank you all very much. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.
excellent. Thanks.